G'day, ZD here, folks. Exiles, welcome for a giant jam-packed Q&A after a huge reveal session. We have here today Chris, Jonathan, and Mark. 3 for the price of 1 this time around, not just Chris. Welcome, folks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Excellent, folks. We're going to be moving through things in rough order that we saw things today during the reveal. So starting with Path of Exile 2 and then moving through some of the new Path of Exile 1 features. So get those questions in through Twitch chat and we'll sprinkle those in through each of those various sections. So first, let's talk about that new movement scheme that was revealed with the new Mercenary class. So we have the new WASD movement. And does this alternate control scheme work with other classes and builds, or is it mainly intended for like this shooter mercenary style?
So when we put it in, I was totally thinking that it was going to be something that you'd want to use with ranged characters way more. But actually, when I tried out some melee stuff, I was pretty sold on it, actually. It was better than I was expecting. There's still a few tweaks to do to make that perfect internally, but like, yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I think I'm probably, I think I'm going to be playing that way myself, actually, even though I was a bit of a skeptic at first of WASD for melee. I think it is good, but we want to make sure that everyone understands that you can change from one to the other whenever you want. It's just one of those things that, yeah, like some people may prefer it, some people may not. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it. WASD rather feels pretty good to me.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, to be honest. Like, I've, die-hard action RPG, Diablo 2 era kind of guy myself. But for some reason, the WASD stuff just feels really natural to play. I guess it's, background and Crimson Land and that kind of thing.
Yeah. That first moment you use it, it's a little bit jarring because W is now not a skill. But once you can get beyond that, it is like very, very fun to play.
It is actually funny going I went loaded up the PoE 1 client again recently, and like I was immediately pressing WASD, like, oh shit.
Yeah. Keep doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also keep trying to dodge roll as well.
Yeah, so yeah.
I had that same problem. I was going to ask then, can WASD movement be added to Path of Exile 1, or is it exclusively a PoE 2 feature?
It's probably going to be pretty hard to add it to PoE 1, and the reason would be because the number of animations you need to support like arbitrary directional movement like that is really high, and the rigs in PoE 1 are so old that it would be really, really difficult to add. So I think it's probably like quite unlikely. And just in general, the animation stuff that we're doing in PoE 2, like it's just a different level. So it was like okay, I'm not going to say easy, but it was easier to add it in PoE 2 than it would have been in PoE 1 by far. So yeah, for now I'd say it's going to be PoE 2 only.
How have you found hotkey usage and things like that while moving around with WASD movement?
So basically, one thing it does do is so it's definitely a thing. But what personally what I found is that so you've effectively got the left click freed up, to put a skill on. So you've kind of got you can have sort of 3 major skills on mouse, and then having other stuff on the keyboard. And it works pretty well for me because the stuff that I put on the keyboard at least tends to be the sort of more rarely used stuff. They're still like commonly used, but still a bit rarer. And so it wasn't too bad. I found it okay. It is a concern for sure. Like I suspect that there might be a few builds that would be a bit harder to do that way, but you can always use the other control scheme if you want. But it's working really well for what we were doing there.
And how well does this translate to controllers then? You would think it'd be perfect for twin sticks.
It is. So we have also implemented so that the right stick you can use to aim which direction that you're going in on controller, and it does work well there. There's like a bunch of other controller stuff that we've kind of been fiddling around with trying to get that better. But it definitely does help in that direction as well. Plus, it just kind of makes movement. Like there's actually stuff even with click to move that we can use. Like we can utilize the fact that we've got the ability for the character to face a different way than they're walking. That actually makes there's some cases where we can make the click to move stuff look more natural as well. It's kind of minor stuff, but the animation does look actually better for click to move too due to that.
And what sort of skills can you use while moving? That was mentioned that some will be kind of like functional in that way.
Yeah, so we're still going through and thinking exactly what we want to do there. But the basic thing is that you definitely want to have, I think, for each build, a few skills that you can use in that way, because it does make combat feel faster when you can kind of be doing stuff on the way to the next monster, this kind of thing. It just kind of improves it in a way that once we tried it, we were just like, wow, that's actually really cool. It won't be like everything, or like a lot of the time I think what we're doing is getting the like we can shorten the windows because we've got this ability now. We can kind of shorten the windows where you're not allowed to move, where there's like movement locked out in skills as well. So like only like right near the contact point do you actually have to stop. And then for other skills, we can do them completely while you're moving. So you know, like some of the skills that you might want to spam in some cases, things like that, it can be okay. So I'm not going to like give you a list or anything, but yeah, we definitely want to have making sure that each build has skills that you can do while moving available, so that you can kind of utilize the time when moving between packs to be
skills that incorporate more movement or even play with the lack of
should be
movement,
simple
like
user
planting your feet.
What was
What's that, sorry?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I think Discord kind of lagged out for a second there.
Oh, okay. But yeah, the other thing as well is that is another question people have asked is like how does it work when you are using click to move? And the answer is honestly pretty simple. Like you click where you want to move, and then you move the mouse and use the skill in the other direction, and then your character will just not be interrupted the move. They'll just keep moving while you shoot in the other direction. That does work. Like it is technically like, I mean, it takes a bit more mouse movement to be able to do it if you want to be able to move while you're doing it, but it does work. So there's no technical disadvantage there other than just, I mean, effectively what you're doing is it's like what the same exact motion you do if you're stutter stepping, except that you're able to actually move at the same time while you're doing it, basically.
Yeah, you effectively like queue up a move command and then fire in the opposite direction or something.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you find that this is... What's that?
I was saying it's like lower APM stutter stepping.
Yeah.
Do you find that this is like opening up a lot new design space for you with skills then? Because this is like a new way of thinking that you haven't really had access to in terms of skill design now.
For sure. There's definitely a lot of stuff. Like we haven't even really yet explored all the repercussions on other builds as much as we would like to yet. Like there's a lot of stuff to change here and kind of get and utilize that stuff for. But yeah, as I said, once we tried it, it's just like, yeah, we need to be exploring this all throughout what we're doing and making sure that we can take advantage of it so it feels as natural as possible when you've got like direct character control like that.
What we're finding here is the overarching goal with the new characters in Path of Exile 2 is that each one plays entirely differently. We're releasing 12 games in one where you can play an entirely different style with each character and feel compelled. Now that you've tried a Mercenary, you want to try another one, for example, because you're going to get a different experience. And this means that Jonathan's team is pioneering these new things like the WASD controls, using a class as an example. Like the Mercenary is the canonical WASD control one because of the crossbow stuff feeling like a gun. And then the fallout from that, of course, is then it benefits all the other 11 classes and millions of different playstyles, and that kind of falls through afterwards, and we get time to experiment with how it actually works on those classes.
Yeah. At the risk of going like off topic a little bit, I already noticed in previous reveals that like the melee stuff is getting a lot more fluid with a lot more movement and stuff like that. But a lot of that was a kind of pre-scripted but modifiable movement after the fact, where you could like whirl and then change direction a little bit like that. But it seems like now even you might even be able to have things like where your character's able to do a cleave while taking a couple extra steps, just little things like that. So it seems like it's going to change gameplay a lot from Path of Exile 1 to 2.
I think it can, but we do have to be careful. Like, I don't want the feeling of just complete floatiness. Like we don't want, like I wouldn't want it so that every skill you can just do without like while moving arbitrarily. Like it needs to still feel like there's at least some amount of the animation where you're kind of like locked into that little bit. So for something like cleave, for example, what I do is you can kind of step into it and then you can move really quickly after the slash. But the actual slash itself, you need a bit of that sort of like locked in, just so that you got something going on there, because otherwise it'll just feel like you kind of don't really exist. You're just like floating around, kind of not really doing anything. So that's a little bit vague, but effectively, I just want to avoid the kind of feeling where where you don't feel like you're a real character in the world, which you can get if you just allow full unrestricted. Like if you do absolutely everything while moving and there was no slowdowns or anything, then it would feel real floaty, and I don't like that either. So it can be a little bit of an interesting one. You have to really look at the feel of every single skill and kind of get the timing windows exactly right for everything to be able to make it actually feel really solid and good. If we're doing our job right, then every class should have quite a distinct feel as far as all that stuff goes.
Like I get what you mean. Like once you have more movement, that's when you can start playing with like, okay, in what situations do we stop movement? Like I noticed with the crossbow, for example, the character planted their feet for the shotgun shots especially, and that made that look and feel a lot more impactful. So that seems by design there.
Exactly.
Perfect. On that note, then let's talk a bit about the crossbows. It seems that they've changed quite a bit since the original reveal with the armor-piercing bolts and whatnot.
Yep, they have. Yep, that was that meme. It's no longer applicable, hopefully. Absolutely. I mean, so the split to all of the classes happened after that last the last reveal, and so then we were kind of like, we need to make sure that we're making I didn't. even like there were the mechanical ideas of like having ammos and stuff like that for the crossbows before, but I don't think we'd quite yet nailed the kind of like how is a crossbow actually going to feel really different to play than a bow. And it wasn't until I sort of made the observation that, hey, like if we're like a crossbow, like if you pull the trigger on a crossbow, it needs to fire instantly. We should be putting the contact point literally at 0 on the animation. So this is a bit of a technical term. Like contact point just means point where the damage happens, et cetera, et cetera. We need to move that right to the start. And if we do that, like what kind of things, would need to change? And we actually found there was like a grab bag. Like as soon as we did that, there's like a grab bag of issues that we off topic, but it's like the amount of engine brokenness that the Mercenary brought to the front was so high. Like the amount of things like that we had to fix in order to make the Mercenary work in the engine was just ridiculous. Like I found so many bugs. I mean, these are all going to be fixed, by the way, in PoE 1 as well, because the engine is shared. But it's like I found out that projectiles like disappear a frame before they arrive at the destination, and they appear 1 frame late after they leave your character as well. And that it turns out all objects when they're created appear 33 milliseconds late from when they actually render. And like there was stuff with trail. I mean, like it was just actually like. Because like when you're dealing with something like this, like if you've got like a bullet effectively traveling ultra fast, it has to happen instantly as soon as you click, and like all these things, there was like so many engine things where it's like we're speeding all this shit up, and like the engines just started breaking all over the place. So yeah, there was a lot of technical improvements that had to happen in order to make that stuff work. Not to even mention the whole like WASD and all the animation system stuff, and yeah, like it was pretty crazy. So I'm really glad to remove a lot of jank that existed that we hadn't noticed before because things weren't fast enough to see the problems. And there was a lot of like frame by framing it and like making sure that every single frame is perfect and all that sort of stuff going on. And yeah, it was pretty crazy during the development of this stuff.
I love how that pans out in terms of improvements.
Sure.
So on the crossbows, I noticed that they have the new like skill bound to the weapon thing where they fire differently. So you have your shotgun crossbow and you have your semi-automatic crossbow or whatever. Mm-hmm. Are we mostly going to be modifying those primary skills, or are there going to be other primary separate skills or just kind of more ammo types that modify the base skills?
So there's definitely going to be more ammo types. There will be other skills, but what we did to sort of solve, as it were, the crossbow, like having crossbow skills that aren't tied to the primary firing type, was to have the attachments. And so those basically are effectively skill gems, except that you equip them where you'd equip a quiver instead. But they have support gems and everything like that. And effectively, whenever we want to have a crossbow skill, as it were, that isn't related to one of those primary firing types, then that'll be where that can go. And so there's way more than what we even showed there. Like we just showed like some grenades, but there's all sorts of other quirky types that have been come up with that you can attach to your crossbow. Like I know someone made like a bayonet at one point. I'm not sure how we're going to use that, but I don't know if that one will actually be useful. But we'll see. We've got a model for it. We'll see if we'll experiment with it. But there's those. But I mean, there's also other things, of course. Like there's stuff that we didn't show here. Like there's still the what do you call them? The the crossbows that pop up when you summon the totem. Ballista totems. There's still ballista totems and other things like that, and like various other skills. So there's definitely other skills that we expect this class to use, but we kind of ran out of like time to be able to show like all the different things that you can do, and we'll show more of those later. But yeah, there's going to be other stuff that you can fill your skill slots with for sure as well. So don't worry about that.
So are some bow skills going to become crossbow skills? Is there going to be shared across the two?
There are certainly some concepts that we might. I mean, look, when we're designing the classes, we're kind of like we do look at PoE 1 and be like, is there anything here that we want to crib from, to kind of to use? And there might have been a couple of things that we've like sort of used as concepts, but overall, it is supposed to feel like this is distinct. And I'm sure maybe there'll be a time where like this is better suited as a crossbow skill than a bow skill. But in general, I guess like we're looking at designing things like this is a full new game. Like we're designing skills again. Like there will be cases where we go back and we're like, hey, this PoE 1 skill is still great. Let's port it over. But in almost all cases, the skills get changed a lot. Like I mean, when you saw the sorceress when we announced all the stuff there, it's like there were skills from PoE 1, but like the changes to them were such that like they don't really feel the same at all. So they kind of end up quite different.
Yeah, I feel like I remember seeing like a melee skill became a spell or something like that. Sure, some pretty big changes.
Weird stuff can happen, yeah.
Yeah. So are the crossbows exclusive to the Mercenary, or are they something anyone can use?
I mean, just like anything in PoE, everyone can always use everything. I mean, we obviously, when we're showing stuff, we sort of show it as if like, this is a thing restricted to this class, something, but it isn't, of course.
Yeah.
Like, you can use it anywhere. And one thing we definitely try to do is make sure that there are keywords that are usable between the classes to make sure, like, even if we don't know exactly how that'll be useful, like that they can lead to things that can be interesting. So, for example, on the crossbow there, we had armor break being used, which is the same mechanic we were using on the warrior. And I mean, look, maybe in theory someone could make a crossbow / mace build. I don't know how that would work, but what I'm saying is, like, by having the shared keywords across different classes, it just means that if someone wants to come up with something weird, they can do that. So yeah, absolutely, you can use stuff across.
I'm definitely going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to do armor piercing bolt, crossbow, and then always crit. It's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably pretty broken, actually, as
Yes,
the ballot
it
stands
is.
right now. I bet it's
is.
actually like real
Yes,
broken.
it is right now.
Yeah.
With it seems like Discord died for the stream a little bit there. Sorry, Jonathan, what did you say you were? Mark, what did you say you were going to do?
Oh, it's using armor piercing bolts to get armor break from a distance, and then using sunder which is a skill we showed on the warrior, because sunder gets always crit and higher crit damage
if the target's
target's armor broken. So when we showed the warrior, you have to use armor break, which is, I guess, kind of heavy strike-esque, right in the face to break the armor. But now I'll just do it from a distance, and then sunder from a distance. And
right. So yeah, there's a potential build there, for sure.
We've got the weapons swapping and the tree swapping and stuff. I hope we see some
works.
hybrid melee ranged. It's a great playstyle.
It can happen.
Especially for the mercenary, I feel it'd be a great fit. But moving on a little bit, we've got the oil grenade, and that effectively showed some environmental interactions, lighting a patch of oil on the ground on fire. Is that something you might expand to with other skills, enemy abilities, or even like combat areas? Like, here's an oil barrel, you can light that on fire or something.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely love that stuff, like the environmental stuff. But I mean, even with the other skills we're designing, like, I mean, things like the volcano interaction with the druid, that's another example of that kind of like place a thing in the world and then you can do something with it. I quite like that stuff. I think it's pretty cool. So yeah, I absolutely want to be doing more of that. I mean, and the more I guess state you can add to get a bit technical about it, to the world, where it's like, placing a thing, like, like all that stuff allows you to do more setting up for something you're going to do afterwards, which I think is a big part of being able to do combos and things like that. So yeah, like I'm a big fan of that kind of stuff.
We do have monsters integrating with that as well. Like, we have, to give a couple examples, we have explosive barrels with lines of gunpowder, and the lines are randomly generated, and then you have monsters with torches that will run up and set them on fire.
Yeah.
And we've got another one as well that throws, it's like more of an alchemist monster, and it throws two types of, I guess, flasks or concoctions. And one creates ground type A and one creates ground type B, and if they mix, they end up creating a new type of ground type and exploding and doing massive AoE damage, like just chemical reactions.
Yeah.
It's coming up with a whole alchemy system for your environmental interactions.
It's cool. We tried it in Heist. Surprise! I don't know if anyone even in PoE 1 notices this, but there is oil there that does catch on fire. It just doesn't look anywhere near as good. Just because, like, where the art is and where the effects is now for PoE 2 is just allowing things to look incredible.
Similarly, we're seeing like more and more powerful control and utility effects. Like, for example, in this clip, we saw the shots placing ice walls, and they were like blocking and taunting enemies, I noticed, it seemed. How do you keep these sorts of effects like feeling powerful and relevant in boss fights without just kind of breaking the fight or trivializing them?
I mean, on some level, like, we have to be able to let players use those tools in boss fights, because otherwise there's no point in them. Like, I really want it to be the kind of game where you can use that kind of more control type stuff. And I mean, like, it's funny because a lot of the designers, when we talk to them, we're like, hey, we should allow this, and they're like, oh my god, it's crazy because like it's going to be way too easy. Like, and then Mark will look at him and he goes, it's not that broken. It's not that broken. It's like, you look at some of the stuff you can do in PoE 1, and I'm like, the ability to like freeze people in place with walls is like nothing compared to like the ridiculousness that your character can get to. So yeah, like when you actually think about it, like it's not that broken, really. I mean, and we want players to have fun at the end of the day, right? We want them to be able to use those tools, and I quite enjoy it. But in particular, though, with the ice, though, those walls, once a monster gets above a certain size, they no longer get blocked by them, and they run through them. They still get they explode. So Ursia, you might have noticed, like the baby wasn't able to get through the walls, but Ursia can run through them, and then they just get that little detonation. So the skill actually changes a bit. Like against small monsters, they have to like stop and attack. It completely blocks them in, and they can't get through. But against large monsters, the monster rolls right through it, but then they explode and get chilled. So it kind of changes the function a little bit for boss versus the small monsters, and so that's why that particular skill I think is actually fine in that regard. So yeah, there's little tricks like that we can do, and I think I honestly really enjoy the stuff we're doing with monster size, which was never a factor in PoE 1 design. Like monster size means that we can say, okay, like bigger, like this happens to large monsters. I mean, it all makes some kind of physical sense on some level. Bigger monsters can have this happen, smaller monsters have that happen, and that can kind of allow you a bit more control in that way as well.
Does this give you, Mark, some interesting tools to play with when designing bosses?
Yeah, I mean, generally, yes. I've had rants about this before. I love the I love the object size. I like things pushing you around, and I like that a small monster can't and a large monster can, and like things like the knockback and just the thing feeling very physical and as it would, I guess, in real life is quite important to me, and it makes the game feel just way more grounded. Like you're actually in there and it makes sense, as opposed to, I mean, that's something about the Mercenary as well. I know this is tangential, but I'll just get into it. Like when, I don't know if people notice, but when you fire at a monster on the ground, like that area had babies in it, the crossbow aims down and shoots down.
Yes,
like
that was a change that was also absolutely needed.
Whereas in PoE 1, and like if there's a little like the little insects, for example, down there, you'll fire your bow and the arrow will just go this and hit it, and it's like it doesn't feel right. Now you may wonder, okay, well, how can it pierce if it aims down? And the answer is it can't. But
I mean, it does a bit because like you still get
sure. It goes through and then hits the ground, but like it does change the gameplay in an interesting way. But it also makes it feel way more realistic, and you're not just like shooting the air.
Yeah. One thing you didn't see in the demo, but actually like now the collision geometry for everything is actually modeled correctly to the to everything, even the stuff outside the gameplay space. So you can fire a grenade out over the buildings and like it'll hit the roofs and like bounce down on the roofs and like go down to the lower story and that sort of stuff. Like it actually has like all of that physics all working and everything.
Even those problems in PoE 1 with like leap slam, where you leap slam off like over a ravine, your character will go down, up, down. No more of that. No more.
Yeah, so like we've got lots of like there's a lot of physical stuff. In fact, like and also just things like arrows hitting like empty space and like stuff like that. Like now they all exactly hit the geometry and like there's lots of I mean, once again, it comes back to all the engine stuff we had to fix in order to make the Mercenary possible. Like, it was just like, we were like, okay, we can no longer tolerate all of this, like, not physical stuff anymore. We have to actually make it right. So yeah, there was a lot of changes required. And it makes just everything feel a lot more realistic and kind of grounded, which is good.
One of the reasons why the groundedness matters here is because one of the factors that varies from fight to fight is the terrain you're fighting in. And so if you can interact with the shape of that terrain in a different way and it actually has an impact, it will make the fights feel different.
I like how it affects the monsters too, because instead of just shooting at a wall when you're up on an elevation, they'll actually like pathfind backwards to try and get a line of sight to you with their projectile.
Ooh. Yeah.
Which is because
they take into account height in the pathfinding now, so they actually have to find like a line of sight to you, up a cliff and this kind of thing. Like there's some pretty interesting things.
Wow, very cool. So for demonstrations and things like demos and stuff, you're obviously going to be showing off as many different abilities and combos and stuff like that as possible, like more than you typically have on an actual character. But I'm curious then, kind of what are your expectations or hopes for PoE 2 in terms of how many skills and combos a well-refined character build is going to be running at endgame?
I mean, I personally believe that you should have probably 2 to 3. 2 is going to be very common. I think 3 will be pretty common as well in terms of like core combos for your character. And then depending on the context, like what's going on with the boss fight or just the monsters, you'll decide to do one or the other. But what I quite like about the way the gameplay is and what we try to strive for is like you've got some plan in mind for what you're doing, but like no plan survives contact with the enemy kind of thing. And like, the enemies are doing things that's kind of disrupting that. And then you're like, oh, I should need to use the skill to kind of like deal with that. And so that a lot of the time you can have like, I think you saw this on the Druid as well. It's like the Druid basically had synergy for the entire set of skills that it had. But in reality, when you're playing, it's like you can't kind of get off the full combo all the time. You need to kind of like, sometimes you can, and then you get a huge amount of damage. But the rest of the time, you're kind of using individual subparts of the combo that like, because multiple parts of it still work together. And so you can still sort of have utilizing different parts of it is still useful in different situations, but then you can kind of use everything together in one go in the end and kind of get something really awesome. So like different characters will feel a bit different in this regard, but I really do want like some like interesting combos going on, and it should be very context sensitive, right? Like what the enemies are doing should matter in what you are doing. Like that is, I guess, the sort of key element of that. And in order to achieve that, you're going to want to have like a few different options on your character to take care of different situations.
Before we move on to some Path of Exile 1 and Affliction questions, we have just a couple more chat questions to ask.
Sure.
Do you need to spend all the crossbow ammo to reload, or can you reload manually as well? Is there like a hotkey or something for that?
Yeah, you can reload manually. So effectively, if you use the ammo skill again, it'll reload the thing. So yeah, there is a reload.
Great. Will Path of Exile 2 be cross-platform at all?
Yes, it will be. Absolutely.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Will boss and monster balancing be done around WASD movement balancing, or will be keeping mouse movement players in mind as well?
I mean, we're always going to make sure that it's okay for both type of players, but I wouldn't say that the balancing has to be hugely different, honestly. Like, especially with the dodge roll and everything, you can get where you need to go with click to move as well. It's just that the immediacy of WASD just sort of feels better. You know, like I think that I don't think there's necessarily a huge balancing task there, but maybe Mark, you've got a different feeling.
No, it's ultimately the same.
Yeah.
But there's some tiny things like to give a real picky example, it's like when you click to move, you pathfind, right? And with WASD, it
is technically pathfinding a little bit, but
a bit less. And so like you're more likely to run into a where if you were to click around something, your character would path around it. But if there was like a point, your character might run into that and get stuck because you actually have to navigate around yourself.
It does pathfind on WASD, though.
Yes, yeah. But there's a couple cases like that, but that's not really balance. It's more like we have to. I mean, yeah, you're running into a dead end.
I would say though that, like, for example, the bag. I don't know what the name of the monster we eventually went with, but the bag ladies. I don't know, in that area, I did find them a bit easier to dodge with WSD because you can like take a step back really easily when you're fighting them. When they get up close. The things like that like are a little bit easier, whereas with click to move, like you're less inclined to because you'd have to move the mouse to the other side of the character to kind of be able to do that, or else dodge roll, which takes a bit longer. So there are like a few cases there where it's like you get a bit more control there, but it's fine.
Yeah, ultimately, there's not a lot you need to change balance wise.
Right.
Well, pretty much nothing.
So will we be seeing a bit more from PoE 2 between now and the beta then?
Of course, well, I mean, at the very least, there'll be, the next league live stream and everything. We'll definitely want to have some stuff to show then. But as we get towards the beta, we're going to be showing a heck of a lot more. And I also want to make sure that we get I want to do a deep dive like this for every character class, so that we can sort of see what to expect. And I think there are also good references for the type of gameplay that a player in terms of when you're picking a class, like what class do I want to pick? Being able to see what type of gameplay you can expect is, I think, a good thing. So I want to have one of those for all the classes, if we can. Yeah.
Great, and you have a lot of classes now to deep dive, so that's a lot of content.
We do.
Great. All right, so moving on to Path of Exile 1 and Affliction first. So Affliction looks like you're kind of walking through a carpet of cockroaches with a candle to scare them off. Do you guys ever worry when you design a league mechanic like this that you're going to be just scaring some players off? They're just going to nope out because of that?
No. It is a horror game and there's a lot of horror in there already. We've had a few examples though, like just to give a small anecdote of there was, I think it was the last or maybe the current, the mystery box that has the spider portal in it.
Mm-hmm.
We actually had people specifically go, I don't want to buy this mystery box because I have arachnophobia and I don't want to get that spider. Is there a way I can get everything but the spider from it? And the short answer is no. But how does that person kill Weaver or get through?
Yeah.
I don't know. But no, generally, the game has a lot of horrific stuff in it, and as you can even see from what's going on in that Mercenary demo, we're not pulling our punches when it comes to that stuff for sure.
I remember Eric came across a list of things not to include in games because they scare the players. Things like objects that are too sharp and pointy, or trypophobia triggering clusters of small irregular holes. And he's like, "This is very useful."
Designed by
Add these.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So, talking about mechanics, the wisps that allow you to explore the Wildwood are somewhat of a limited resource, it seems. Is this a timer, or is it a distance traveled, some kind of mechanic like that?
It's distance traveled, but it's distance traveled into the bugs and the cockroaches and stuff.
Yep.
So it's how much of that you can purge away. So if you run back on a path you've already been, like let's say you run up some way and then you want to go back and then go a different direction, like running back where you've been doesn't use the resource, but running anywhere new does.
I think that'll be a popular decision instead of it being like, say, a hard timer.
Yeah, for sure.
So how long is a venture into the Wildwood typically? Like, how long are you like exiting your map?
Well, even typical is somehow subjective here, but obviously it depends on your character. But I mean, anywhere, I would expect most people to be in there like kind of a minute, upwards of 2 minutes. But
So it sort of depends on what you run into, though, because if you run into a boss fight, it can it can be a while.
It does depend what you find, but like I mean, you could be in there as short as 30 seconds, or or a lot less if you're just not really caring where you're going. But that is not the right tactic to have at all.
And there isn't time pressure here in any way. You can be in there for a quarter of an hour if you're just incredibly methodical and barely move.
I don't think that anyone would be doing that, but yeah.
You can.
We are catering to slower players who don't like the gotta go fast thing. Like, you can go fast. It's more efficient to go fast, but you don't have to.
I wanted, I wanted something that was normalized a bit more between faster and slower players. Like you can do it at your own pace as opposed to feeling like ultra stressed. And a faster player can do it as fast as they want, and that's still fine.
Excellent. So you get these wisps, and you free them. They go into your map, and they infect monsters, and make them drop more loot. Are they like more likely to choose more powerful enemies like rares and bosses, or is it just fully random?
They are more likely to pick, bosses and rares or higher rarity monsters going down. Yes.
And otherwise there would have been like no chance for multiple wisp types to go into one monster, right? So we had to make it so that it was relatively likely for that to occur, but it doesn't always happen. It's kind of it's variable.
As a typical Path of Exile player, I immediately thought of abuse cases for this. Can you like kill all the monsters in a map except the boss, and then just go in and come out, and then free the wisp into the boss only, stacking it up?
Thankfully, as we're also PoE players, we have also thought of this. We don't think of everything, but at least in that case, no, it is a chance per monster. So if you clear the whole map and then go and do it, the resultant is, it's actually detrimental for you.
And the Wildwood always appears at the start of the map. So that means that you always like have the chance, like that way you get the most, just to make sure that you get the most equity of drop equity or whatever out of doing it. So a
little like Delirium where the mirror would spawn.
Exactly, it is exactly like that. Yeah.
Great. Well, you guys have thought of it.
We've done this for a while now.
Some experience.
Yeah.
So some players love mechanics in maps, and others seem to love ones that cause them to take a break from a map. There's definitely some divide there. Interestingly, I noticed that Affliction is a little bit of both. It's a portal, but it juices your map afterwards. How do you folks like to balance the desires of the player base when it comes to designing leagues like this?
Ultimately, we just like to do a bit of all of it. Sometimes it's out of map, sometimes it's in map, sometimes in this case it's a bit of both. Like there isn't really some, elaborate decision that goes into it. It's just kind of like we feel like it's time for one or the other.
I mean, we definitely have discussions of like, we've done a couple of an area ones, let's do an out of area one. We've done some out of area ones, let's do an area one. Like, in this case, we were like, it just sort of felt good to have both things. It was good. But yeah, like honestly, we try to just have a variety.
There's this kind of concept, at least, that I use internally, which is what shape is the combat, and we want to try all the different shapes we can do, and we haven't run out of shapes yet.
This shape technically is whatever shape you want to, because you can run. So it's an undefined shape.
All right.
I have to always look out for my co-op buddies. How does Affliction work in multiplayer?
So once you die, you can't go back in. Just worth noting. Technically, that's multiplayer or single player, but only the map owner can, or if they're not present, I believe it nominates someone else, but I'll make sure that's the case if not, can actually reveal fog or the mist, whatever, the bugs. And when you collect, so the expectation is the party members kind of follow them around. And the wisps that you collect, it's the same amount. So they're just a shared pool. Like
any player who collects wisps will go to the primary player. So like they're all so there's effectively the map owner is the one in charge of of exploring basically.
But anyone can pick them up if you want to spread out a little bit like that. So it works in multiplayer. due to the nature of the rewards, just being based on the monster's drops, they will scale with like party drops like normal. So there's no like they just work as standard multiplayer drops would work.
Right.
Great. And we get this new Ascendancy system as a reward for this, which seems quite significant, especially seeing some of the specific bonuses there. How challenging is it to actually unlock these Wildwood Ascendancies and gain all of their points?
So you can get 8 points per class. You get your first 2 points when you meet the NPCs, which occurs relatively early. I think we have and it is slightly RNG based, and is whether or not you find them. And but you can increase the chance of finding them by following the trails of wisps. They will lead to them.
So the different colors have different things at the end of the trails, so you can kind of pick which direction you want to go.
And each color associates to an NPC. So I think that if you can start appearing around Act 2, and then the expectation is by end of Act 5, you've probably found each of them once. And when you meet them, you get your first 2 points, and then they'll give you a quest if you spec into that class to find more wisps or kill some monsters, like real basic quests, all done within the forest. And then you get your 4th point, and then or 3rd and 4th points, and then you have a quest to kill like a mini boss, and then it'll give you your 5th and 6th, and then the final 2 points are from killing the final boss of the league, which is probably relatively difficult. Like that's a level 83 kind of, maybe equivalent to say like Lycia from Sanctum, or not quite pinnacle boss, but like just below it kind of thing. So that will be hard. So you could argue the first 6 points, the first 2 points are very easy. First 6 easier than probably say Labyrinth or the normal Ascendancy equivalent, but the last 2 points will be quite a lot harder than the regular Ascendancy 8 last 2 points.
And this is in parallel / addition to your existing Ascendancy class and its progress. You have 2 classes here to clarify.
Yeah, and that last one that was revealed was like a little bit of everything. pretty cool. Those charms. Yep. So the unique specters from the Breaker of Oaths, including bosses like the Hydra, was certainly a surprise. Can you have more than one Hydra Spectre, or like an army of bosses?
You can have up to your Spectre limit of Hydras, but they cannot be desecrated. So once you have it, once you have the item, you buy it from him. You can only Spectre it once. Once it dies, then you have to buy more of them. But yes, it will be hard to find them.
You can trade them.
Yes, you can trade for them. I really wanted this whole I wanted you to be able to find the NPC and then be able to effectively buy something from them that could be worth multiple divines. And I'm like, a Hydra could be worth multiple divines. Like, let's see if we can do that.
Note, you can buy these and trade them even if you aren't that class.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
So there's a reason to look at the shop for all of the NPCs, regardless of whether or not you're that Ascendancy class, because other people can use them.
Talk about the fragility of the Hydra.
Yes. Well, it is worth noting the Hydra's health in particular is relatively low. So you do have to keep it alive. The Spectres in general they're pretty interesting. There's a lot I've tried to go for where we've gone and tried to give stats that other builds wouldn't use. Like there's one, for example, where one of its properties just says your owner, as in the player, has 5% more attack damage or melee attack damage. I can't remember which of those two. And then if you get all your Spectres, you can get like 40% more attack damage. But now you're a melee build that's investing in plus Spectre limit, and there's some interesting weird things you might be doing there. And then of course that means you need minion life, otherwise they're all just going to die. And there's hopefully some kind of weird, interesting builds that come out of this, where you have unorthodox builds using Spectres that you normally wouldn't.
And you had that interesting one with Fire Fury and
there's a kind of, I don't know what they're called, but it's effectively Fire Fury and Hailrake, and they specifically the Fire Fury one becomes empowered if there is if you also have a Hailrake Spectre, and the Hailrake Spectre says the same thing. So then you want to run 2 different ones, which again is also kind of abnormal, because normally when you do play a Spectre build, you stack a lot of the same thing. So it's promoting a bit of just different gameplay around that.
So there's something going on between the Fire Fury and the Hailrake. Then they have some backstory together. I guess
they're empowering each other, for sure.
They are. Fanfic authors take note.
Yeah, here we go. New fanfic in progress. The charms for the Wildwood Primalists, they capture random parts of other Ascendancy nodes and allow you to create a new one in kind of like a build your own Ascendancy fashion. What sort of limitations are there? Can you just get like any power from any node?
You can't get anything. I can't remember exactly what you can and can't get, but there are some stuff that is like it's binary and ultra powerful, and like that's just too much power to give from a single node like that can have 2 modifiers on it. So you can't get everything, but you can get most things, and even in some cases where they are binary, we've made non-binary versions of that property where it's like can either be chance based or percentage based, like a portion of it. But they do stack as well. So like, for example, you can get the 3 sockets, and obviously you can get like, we showed, say the Occultist Curse Explosion. Like if you just want to go all in on the chance of that, you could try and get that on all 3 of them. But again, it's going to be pretty rare. They're unmodifiable, but again, tradable. And I'm expecting, again, going under the philosophy of I want you to be able to find these NPCs and occasionally find something worth a lot. I do want it to be that occasionally you find one and you get multiple divines worth of a trade because you find just the perfect charm.
And again, you don't have to be that class to find the charm.
Yes, we'll keep reiterating that. Yes.
Yeah,
Always
there's
check
some
the shops.
Yeah, the shops should be valuable. Hopefully.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. Are there any limitations to this Primalist shouting items at corpses thing? It's like, are people going to be going around shouting at every corpse for extra loot?
Well, it's one of these interesting. This one's been very controversial, I'll point out internally. Don't get me wrong. See, for me, I really like it because it's a thing where if you're an efficient, let's think of it a few different ways. Firstly, if you're destroying corpses, it doesn't work, right? There's no body left to get loot from. So you can deal with spikers and or the porcupines and among other things. You have to have the corpse around, which means you have to be playing a build that doesn't destroy corpses, meaning of course you have to deal with the porcupine Goliaths. I don't know who heard that before, but whatever. And then the other thing to note is it actually rewards slower players more than faster players because you have to Warcry, which is cooldown based. Are you really going to wait around meticulously Warcrying on every single corpse, or are you just going to move on and kill more monsters and run more maps? And so if you want to get the most out of your map, of course, that's a way to do it. But if you want to get most out of your time, that is not the way to do it. So yes, you could like Warcry, bind it to your left click and then just Warcry whenever it's available and get whatever loot you can get.
I reckon opening the chests is the
opening
that's time efficient.
Opening chests is a big time
that's
saver.
the main use of that skill, I would say.
But it is worth noting, just to get into some specifics of how that works as well. It doesn't care about the monster's quantity and rarity. It does care about map quant and rarity. So a boss is just going to occasionally drop like an item, if that. It doesn't like re-drop all its drops. So it's not like ultra powerful. Due to that, it's probably honestly going to yield a little bit more, like it's more for like getting a little bit of extra currency than it is getting like unique items and rare items and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask the obvious question that you knew you'd get when you added a backpack inventory expansion. Do you think you'll give this to people outside of the Primalist?
Short answer, no. But I mean, look, we chuck these in, we experiment for 3 months and we see. This was also the node of the second highest level of controversy internally. We'll give it a go. We'll see what happens. But like, I do not see that thing returning outside of the Primalists after the league, even if the league happens to go core.
Yeah.
Controversial league design, it sounds like internally. Oof.
Well, they're 3 months experiments essentially.
Yeah, we like to try things.
I say controversy. It's fun.
It's not like there's a shouting match or anything going on, right? Like it's just.
Well, one of us isn't shouting. No.
We've got some more chat questions on Affliction before we move on to some of the other features. When you went to the Wildwood, do you start at the last place you're at? Is it like a continual exploration, or is it a new area each time?
It's not continuous, no. It is effectively an infinite forest, but you're put in a random place every single time. It's new exploration. It isn't continuous from the previous areas, no.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels slightly like the idea of Delve without the actual specific.
It isn't really like Delve because it doesn't have the whole like big map or anything like that.
Mm. Are the wisps tradable or collected as currency items at all?
No, I mean, they're tradable to the vendors, but that's not really trading. They're usable as currency for the vendors, but aside from that, no. They are, and between instants, they don't carry over at all. Right? Because once you leave the Wildwood, they're dispersed, so you don't get to keep them at all. No.
Mm-hmm.
And just clarifying for people that missed this detail, you'll be able to use the regular Ascendancy class alongside the Wildwood Ascendancy class. It's extra on top.
You will eventually get 8 points in both. Yes.
Sweet. Can monsters attack from the Fog of War in Affliction, or only once they're fully revealed? Ooh, good question.
You will not get You're both not going to be like given an advantage as a range character to shoot into it, and you will not be attacked from it. They will not do similar to Delve Darkness. They will come out of the darkness before they engage with you. And generally, only things you reveal will actually engage with you.
Do map modifiers from the area you entered the Wildwood from affect the Wildwood, or is it completely separate zone in that regard?
The map mods do affect it, yes. And
oh wow.
Where it doesn't increase the amount of wisps you get, it does increase the loot you get in general, which multiplicatively applies with the bonuses the wisps give monsters afterwards. So you are obviously, to get the max rewards like normal, you're incentivized
But
to
pack size works on the monsters in the Wildwood.
Oh yes.
And because pack size works on them, that means you do get more wisps if you increase pack size. Because they're part of the drops of those monsters as well.
There are monsters that have wisps already in them in the forest, and they will give wisps. So yes, pack size will increase the amount of wisps you can get.
Which actually means that pack size can increase the duration that you can stay in the Wildwood, if I understand that correctly.
Different wisps.
Oh, different. All right, because that's
Yes.
right. Okay, so it doesn't. It'll just increase the rewards then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just more rewards.
Yeah,
And
between this and the
technically
wisps you're
difficulty.
freeing, it sounds like a bit of a map juicing league then. People
That
get excited
was,
about.
I mean, that was what I was going for. I
Mm.
really like things like Delirium where they overlap with all the other leagues.
Yep.
It's worth noting on that point. You might think, okay, the wisps disperse into the air and affect monsters once you exit. It will also affect monsters that are then spawned afterwards. So if you then go and activate a breach, there is like a portion of the breach monsters will be dusted as well, and thus their rewards and difficulty will also be increased. So yeah, it overlaps with any in area league, I believe, as long as the monster gives loot and experience. Which obviously, if it doesn't, you don't really care about it. So.
Yeah.
This league sounds cracked. I like it. All right. Talking a bit about Ultimatum, the long-awaited return. It has been a long time in the returning. Did you face some specific challenges with its re-implementation or something?
Main challenge, I guess, was finding time to actually do the rebalance and reassess it. But like once we found the time, which we did, we got through all that, and I mean, now it's finally coming back. But yeah, it just comes down to time. We've got so much we always want to do, and just finding the resources to be able to get someone to fully reassess it and make the changes that we want it can be challenging for sure.
So it's not just something you wanted to just slap back in as it was. Then it sounds like it's changed a fair bit.
It's had a substantial amount of work done to it. Like, it is quite a lot there. There's a lot there. Yeah.
And obviously it's going to be very different to how it was given the Atlas passives as well, and how you can modify it and change it, which will be relatively fun. But taking that into consideration as well is something that we didn't have to deal with before that we do now.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that Ultimatum was so popular and so requested to return that it was like the number one thing asked about at ExileCon? Is there anything to like learn from that for future league designs?
Well, I think about it, and also why do I think I like it? I mean, the mod selection is fun. I like how it works in parties as well, and I like, for people who know my Aurabot addiction, I love playing in parties where you get to vote on the mods and you go and pick the mod that no one wants just because you want to. Or you're an Aurabot and you pick that mod that causes your auras to apply to the enemies, and you just then hopefully your teammate, yeah.
And the double on nothing stuff is also very. I don't want to use the word addictive because that's a bad word these days, but definitely addictive.
Oh, I love that, and I think a lot of people resonate with that as well. Where you when you've got the divine orbs on the line, or the headhunter on the line, or like just whatever items on the line, it's like the thrill is just, it gives you that adrenaline rush that like I almost used to get in hardcore league. When I actually played that a lot more. Rest in peace.
It's risk reward, to put it another way, right? It's good risk reward stuff. Yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
I think it had like a unique pacing too, with like intense action break, intense action break.
Oh yeah, for sure. I like that as well a lot. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say too many lessons learned aside from just like, or like, how we can use things in the future. But I guess, ultimately the risk reward and the pacing are probably the two biggest ones.
Do you want to you want to talk about what happened with the combat changes to do with rare monsters and stuff in Ultimatum?
Yeah, I think it was around the time there was a lot of there was a bit of like, how do we make this harder that went on, and it ended up just cranking the rare monsters up. Like there was just points where there were like 9 rare of those blood chieftains on your screen, and the problem with that, especially with like obviously now looking at rare modifiers, like the level of visual pollution that adds, and like you can't even tell what's happening. Like there was a lot of going on in that league where there's just a massive crossfire of projectiles and just like a whole bunch of rare monsters, and like so we've gone with almost a more what we call expedition style balance, which is just like tone that down but make each monster individually more difficult and more meaningful. So it should be that it is less like more comprehensible in the moment as to what you're actually fighting and what you're actually doing, and still difficult, as opposed to just like spam everything, like crank up the rare monster number to infinity. But that's mostly, I think, of what's going on. It's just which is honestly been working pretty well with respect to our monster balance lately.
So Metamorph is getting removed as a part of this coming back of Ultimatum, with its unique rewards going to Ultimatum. Can you tell me a little bit about that decision, like to remove Metamorph?
There's a few things going on there, but the first is just the visual clarity of it again. Going back to that, like you put these monsters together and then it just does this kind of like morphing thing. I mean, look, I've played this a lot, and it transforms into something and then I'm dead. I'm like, I don't even know what just happened. Like, what killed me here? I actually don't know. And it is meant to be the case that obviously I know what monsters I'm putting in, and I'm like, I'm putting in this monster, this monster, this monster, and I know these do this skills, and because this one's in the brain slot, it does this big AoE. But the reality is, like, that's way too much to try and know and remember, and like there's hundreds of monsters with hundreds of skills going on there, and it's like you can't really tell. And so when you do put it together, it's like, oh, I like these rewards, and you put those in, and that's ultimately what you do as a player for that. And so you put in a monster, it spawns, and you maybe just insta die or you maybe not. And getting that right is just pretty impossible, I would say. Like, I love the mechanic in a nutshell of you get to put monsters together to create a new boss fight, but it just wasn't working.
It was never my favorite league visually either. I just don't think it really looks that great. And there was actually one other one. I don't know if you want to talk about it or I can, but I think it actually was surprisingly, Metamorph was like quite annoying from a maintenance perspective. Like there was quite a lot. Like every time we added a monster, we had to do stuff relating to Metamorph, and like also the way it was originally made was just like a bit annoying. So there was certainly there were a lot of designers who were happy to see it gone as well with regard to just maintenance stuff as well. So
and we're careful before we remove content, right?
Oh, sure.
Considered decision.
Yeah, I mean for sure, but it's like there was certainly a lot of factors there.
One other thing about it, I guess the meta endgame thing where you put together 5 boss parts and do it in his lab, like there was that sad thing where because that area was a standalone area, it never got map mods. Like it felt like often the rewards and the difficulty were just underwhelming relative to doing them in the area. I mean, you're less likely to just get insta-killed in there at least. So in some ways it did it better in that it was more controlled and telegraphed, but in the other sense it was just too easy. Like the thing spawned and then just died within 3 seconds often. The life wasn't high enough, and no map mod damage. Like, yeah. So it was just due for its removal, honestly.
Yeah, I certainly agree with a lot of issues that Metamorph had and experienced a lot of myself, but I do think there was a good idea there. And like you said, with the boss parts going together, that actually felt like it worked a little bit more. But like you said, it wasn't quite there. So something to play with in the future, maybe.
Yeah, oh, for sure. The idea is, there is a sound idea there for sure that I'd like to see if we can play around with later and re-envision in some way, hopefully.
Yeah, you get the situation where in order to keep it, you kind of want to do all the work to rework it. And if you're doing all that work, you may as well just bring Ultimatum back.
So this does raise a question you haven't had to deal with before, where you've removed a mechanic now that has a premium tab that people have purchased. What is the plan for that?
So that tab, due to Catalyst moving to Ultimatum and there being the inscribed ultimatums, that tab is just immediately converted to an Ultimatum tab. So it'll have the Catalyst will now store there, and your inscribed ultimatums will also, I think there's 60 slots for inscribed ultimatums in there as well. So you don't need to buy a new one. It'll automatically transfer over.
Perfect. Sounds great. All right. Let me just see if there's any other ultimatum questions. With Metamorph out of the game, will there be another master hideout NPC to replace Tane?
Not currently, no.
All right. Can Ultimatum be blocked on the Atlas passive tree so that it doesn't appear?
Yes, it can. The same node that blocked Metamorph has been changed to a new node that blocks Ultimatum.
All right. Cool. We have a bunch of questions about Transfigured Gems. This is a big one, and chat also has a bunch of questions about it too, I can tell. So this new Transfigured Gem system's kind of a big deal. Is this replacing Labyrinth enchantments, alternate qualities, and threshold jewels entirely?
Short answer, yes. It is replacing it. Belt enchants are gone, boot enchants are gone, etc. Which I like in the sense that it reopens, because those were very old designs. I mean, sure, the belt enchants came newer, but it does free up a lot of design space to use in the future. And with a lot of the changes to quality and what the gems are doing themselves, like the loss is ultimately inconsequential. So yeah, they're gone.
Deal with it. All right. Are there multiple different transfigurations for each skill, or is there one for each? It seems like so many new gems, effectively.
So, I mean, we're still cranking them out. Like, we're not going to stop until there's a cutoff, effectively, and then we'll probably add them later if we still feel like we have to. But we're aiming for 1 per primary damaging skill minimum, but 2 maximum. So it's 1 to 2 per skill, but auras don't get them, heralds don't get them, utility stuff don't. We're really focusing on your main skills that you would primarily normally 6-link and whatnot. I mean, I know you can do higher link herald builds, but you know,
that limit of 2 maximum is just in the context of this particular expansion. If it's a popular system, we can make many in the future.
Yeah.
It allows us to so there's this thing where cleave is cleave, and you could change cleave to something. You could change cleave, but now you're ruining just the kind of simple thing it is at level 2. You get it at the game, you just want to cleave stuff. So overcomplicating that to try and make it more interesting and new is honestly not the right answer, and it's kind of a thing that's happened to a lot of skills. So now with this alternate gem system, we get to take those ideas that people have of how we can be transformative with something like cleave, and we get to just add that skill gem without having to compromise that early game experience. And that, I think, is very, very valuable. And it's, I mean, the possibilities are endless, as I guess I could say, right?
So how do you be transformative with something like cleave? I'm curious. How do you approach that?
Well, I don't know. I can either talk about what we've actually done or talk about what we could do.
Both.
I mean, something is you can. Well, actually, okay. Let's go with what we have done. I think what we've done with it, and there's some details here I might be wrong on, or something that might have changed, but we'll just get into it. I think right now you have to be using a sword and an axe, so 2 different weapons, which is interesting. I believe it also scales. I think it generates rage and scales AoE based on rage. So it's kind of pushing you to be a rage build. So it's worth noting, that might sound more niche, and that is the point. The alternate gems, the transfigured gems, are generally more niche. But the power opportunity is much higher as a resultant of that. So they will scale way better into endgame, and it will save us the problem of just having this extreme power curve of damage on cleave just to try and make it do an absurd amount of AoE again. So
Are there any other cleave?
I think we've just got the one right now. We experimented with a few others. I think there's one with Impale, but I think we've gone with that on Double Strike now, and some stuff with Bleeding, but it's gone on something I did. So many. There's the hundreds of these things, and we've gone through so many hundreds of iterations that forgive my memory a little bit, but yeah, there's a lot going on there for sure.
How does this affect Val gems? Do these new versions have Val versions, or only the originals?
These new versions, well, technically the way it is worked now is just you can have a Val alternate cleave, and that just grants Val cleave, but it doesn't have the same mechanic, so it won't have the rage thing. It technically the Val skill is a separate ability, and so yes, it can be corrupted to grant that extra ability, but it doesn't have the same properties. No.
Gotcha. Yeah. So are they always going to be just strictly better? Because that cleave version sounds better than regular cleave, or is it sometimes going to be they're just quite different?
It's strictly better if you embrace the niche. Yes.
Right.
If you are investing in rage and speccing into and using the sword and axe, then yes, of course, it's better.
I mean, you can't exactly say that the one that has zombies falling from the sky is strictly better, right? It's just a totally different.
True.
It's just a totally different thing. So,
yeah.
It looked pretty awesome.
It does depend on your definition of better, of course, but I'm talking about just like raw clear speed or raw, boss killing speed. Yes, from that measure, like especially with respect to the low level skills, that is often going to be the case if you embrace that build and that kind of more niche build. But yes, again, there are plenty that are like hard to compare. Like the Frost Bomb is a good example. Like it's now a clearing skill as opposed to a more utility focused skill, not having the cooldown, for example. So a lot of them fill different roles, and so they can't really be compared one to one. But yeah,
I mean, it's definitely going to shift the meta a lot. Like just because there's going to be there's a lot of new stuff to try there. So
it's shifting it enough that if people were to ask me what I'm going to play, I actually genuinely have no idea. I honestly am. I don't know. I'll find out in the last day probably, but.
Is this something you might explore with utility skills or support gems, things like that as well in the future?
It's a big maybe.
Yep.
Support gems. Haven't really thought about a support gem case. I mean,
the thing with support gems is you can just add more support gems and you don't need to worry about modifying the existing ones really. So
you may as well just
add
add more.
Yeah.
Alternate heralds. It can be done in some cases. Yes, it can be. But we'll see whether or not it finds need for it. It's just in those cases, it's like it goes from giving buff A to buff B. Like doing it with an aura, like you'd have to do something very wildly different to make it really transformative. Otherwise, you're going from just giving a certain stat to giving another stat, and that's not really what it's about.
Yeah.
What does this mean for heist in terms of it losing one of its big rewards, but also like specific heists that were gem type heists and whatnot?
So the way, how that works now is that every single tile set so the rewards are no longer bound to I should say the rewards from the display cases at the end.
Yeah.
At the end of the blueprints are no longer bound to the tile set or the base item type of the blueprint. So you can get kind of any of the rewards. You can get replicas from any of them. You can get alternate base types from any of them, or experimented base types, and you can get now currency. One thing we did do is buff the currency. Like we did certainly obviously acknowledge losing the gems removes some of the value from running heist, quite a lot of it. So we buffed the currency just to make it better. So when you do get to the end, you have less like miss cases where you just get like 2 chance orbs. It's like that from completing a blueprint, that's just like completely insufficient. We have added new trying to make chase ones, but as it's pretty hard to reliably make chase uniques because the meta and the players kind of ultimately control what that is. But we've tried to add more powerful ones. We have rebalanced a number of replica uniques. And we've rebalanced a lot of experimented base types, including trying to emphasize that the jewelry, the amulets and the rings have some very, very powerful alternatives. Honestly, they're probably the best amulet you can get now is an experimented base type amulet. But obviously they're pretty hard to find. And you'd have to craft it, of course.
It's 5 new replica uniques, I believe.
Yes, I believe there's 5 new replica uniques. Yeah,
and 10 other uniques in this expansion, so 15 new uniques total.
Yeah,
I don't think we mentioned that in the.
Yeah.
Nice. So safe to say, heist will be something you'll be keeping a close eye on, then to make sure that the rewards are up to par now after this removal.
I hope so for sure. I mean, me personally, I'm just excited about those experimented base type amulets and rings. Like before, we had the -1 prefix, +1 suffix, and now you've got like -3 prefix, +3 suffix, and -3 suffix, +3. The invert of that, and like it's like, what kind of ring can you make when you've got 6 prefixes? Is that better? Is that worse? Or like 6 suffixes, and then there's like ones that reduce the amount of. There's ones that reduce the amount of prefixes but increase the potency of suffixes and stuff like that. And so,
stop hearing about this, Mark.
Yeah,
I'm like, geez.
I get that facial expression as well when I'm.
It's like, you sure about this?
Yeah.
Jonathan and I have seen the code to handle this stuff, and we're both like, "Ooh, how does?"
No, it's just
Hey, it's good.
Interesting.
Nice.
Cool.
I like when seeing devs learn about these things for the first time. So good.
There's always so much going on that it is nearly impossible for everyone to know everything.
For sure.
For sure. Yeah. That makes sense. So people are obviously pretty excited about the Transfigured Gems. They look quite exciting, and that's a lot of effectively new skills for us to play with. But it does kind of raise the question about one of the more controversial decisions with this change is that, well, the Labyrinth, it has fairly different gameplay than most of Path of Exile. It's got like a lot of environmental hazards and traps and puzzles and a labyrinthian layout. And naturally, that's not exactly super wildly popular content for people to run. Not everyone wants to play that. So can you tell me about the decision to make Transfigured Gems specifically a reward for Labyrinth, especially since it looks like something that you'll want to run a lot to get more of them?
Well, a few things to talk about here. I mean, the Labyrinth is, I understand. I understand how some people feel about it and people don't. But one thing is, it is core content that you do run through the campaign and you do to Ascend. And we wanted it to be that the Transfigured Gem system is accessible there, as opposed to, like, say, where alternate qualities were in Heist, even though there was a kind of soft mandatory nature of having alternate qualities. It's like, well, it was the same problem. I don't want to run Heist, let's say, in a given league, or someone does and someone doesn't, and so you have to trade for them. And so for that case, it's the exact same thing, right? You can trade for these Transfigured Gems, of course. But we've done two things as well. So obviously when you get to the end of it, you put your gem in, you can pick from the one of three outcomes. It maintains its level and its quality as to what you put in. So the skill doesn't just become worse, at least in that regard. But sometimes there is an option that will transform it directly into its transfigured counterpart. Which means if you don't want to, take the gamble and just keep trying to pick random ones, you can wait for that and convert your, say, Firestorm directly into a Transfigured Firestorm. So that at least will make that a bit easier. But yeah, ultimately, I wanted it to be somewhere where it was introduced early enough, around level 30 is about right. So you're not waiting until end game before you can get these. Like, a player can experience these through the campaign, get a feel for them, get used to them, and level them up, instead of getting to end game and then completely changing their entire build. Like, it being early enough, and Labyrinth is around the point where that is a good place to commit to that. And also, you're already doing it for your Ascendancy, so it's a good way to introduce the mechanic to those players, as opposed to just kind of putting it somewhere a little bit random and a little bit hidden. So that's the primary motivation.
Path of Exile has a lot of content that is going to vary depending on player taste. Some people like delve, some people don't. And that content has specific rewards. And those rewards are almost always tradable. And so in this case, if you want one of the gems, you can also trade for it if you don't like Labyrinth.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm interested in that idea of players running into it as a course of their regular gameplay. Does that mean there's a pretty good likelihood then that each time you run Normal Crawl and Merciless Labyrinth and whatnot for the first time, and say you only do them those times, that you're going to actually get a pretty relevant gem reward upgrade each run?
The option is always there. So one of the crafts on the bench is always to convert it to a Transfigured Gem. So it's not like that one's random. Yep. Whether or not you'll get the one you exactly want, obviously isn't reliable, but you will always get... so if you put in the common one that's put there is if you put in an int gem, you will get a transfigured int gem back. So at least it's likely if you put in a spell, you'll get a spell. And if you don't want to take it, you can just be like, no, I don't want it, and take your gem back and then try again next time. So it doesn't force you to... So you can put your primary skill in there, hoping for the best. And if you don't get it, you take it back and then just keep playing your build, or you run it again if you want, or you can wait till crawl and run it. And it is worth noting that, let's say I know this is a bit later in the game, but the Uber Labyrinth has 2 crafts by default instead of 1 now. So when you get to the end, you get a few more opportunities at doing it. And that's one tactic could be knowing that the easiest labyrinth is the shortest and easiest to get through, obviously being lower level and shorter. You can, at like a high level player, could just go and run that a number of times just to try and get the right Transfigured Gem. But obviously you won't get a lot of the good crafts and a lot of the good rewards that also come from it. But if that was your way to try and get your most appropriate Transfigured Gem the fastest, that is a tactic you could do. So it's not really meant to be ultra taxing and time consuming to try and get the one you want.
That sounds like from a reward perspective that it's quite good for both lab runners and also people just doing it just the once as they go through. So I like the reward sounds of that. But are there any planned changes to running the labyrinth itself or making the labyrinth better in the future?
We went over that a lot. And as a simple, again, going back to like, we think of it like this: we could have done that, or we could have added Ultimatum. It's a resourcing problem. Not to say those are the two options, but what I'm saying is that it is very what it needs is a lot of love, and we need the time to do it. So yes, we had a massive list of changes of things we wanted to do, and we just couldn't find the time to do it. So it is something I definitely would love to do later for sure. Because
all right, next league, guys. Good, nice, cool. Sounds good.
I was about to joke confirmed, but that's a bit dangerous.
I said it for you.
Next week, so yeah.
Will we get to see all the gems before launch? The Transfigured Gems?
It is our intention to start posting them, yes. As we're still churning through them, I think our plan is to start posting, like we'll do a series of posts. I could be wrong. The community team can correct me at some point, but I think it's to do a series of posts, and as we then make more, we'll just do more posts and just keep adding them until the last very possible moment.
It's worth mentioning with this kind of content, because it's so parallel and because so many, like, every gem is optional because there are so many possibilities. We just start 200, and then the ones that are finished get released, and the other ones get released later or scrapped, and we don't know what the set is going to be currently, and we're just going to keep going till the last minute getting these in, and yeah, it should be interesting.
All right. For standard players, what's happening to existing alt quality gems and lab enchant items and stuff like that? Are they sticking around?
I think the enchants remain. Alt quality gems, I do believe all of this will be in the patch notes after this, so I might say some wrong stuff, but I do believe alt quality gems just get converted to regular quality, retaining the value.
But the quality, the quality that that is now different because we've changed.
Oh yeah, well that's it's worth noting that the quality on every or almost every single gem, I think the word quality appears 314 times in the patch notes. I believe is what it is.
Yeah.
There has been a substantial quality adjustment to all the skills. I know this is tangential from the question a little bit, but we're going with a more multiplicative approach there. So instead of like just a lot of gems being 20% increased damage or 10% increased attack speed, we're trying to really look at what is the skill doing. Like if it's something that is about duration, we instead add duration, but instead of doing 20% increased duration, we're adding like +1 or 2 seconds, like, or +0.1 per quality kind of thing. So it's meant to be more multiplicative as opposed to increases, because there were skills where obviously the more of the increase you have on the passive tree, the worse the quality becomes, or vice versa. So yeah, but this is, I think, changed with a lot of the base skills as well, mind you. I think Discharge in particular is one where it's like it has increased area of effect per charge consumed, where that obviously could get it to a massive amount of increased area of effect, which means if you're playing that build, then investing into like a 10% increased area of effect node on the tree is ultimately doing nothing. Like you're going from 200% increase to 210, like it kind of doesn't really matter. But now, so that's been changed to be multiplicative as well. So as we've gone through and done this qualities, we've tried to do that on a lot more gems to make the gem more like about its base stats, and the passive tree is multiplying that as opposed to adding with those stats, which does yield a fairly large amount more power for a lot of these skills.
That sounds like a quality change. I love it. Sorry, couldn't help. We've run over time, but just a couple more questions before we finish up today. So in the past, it was pretty typical for expansions to come packaged with some pretty substantial changes to skill balance. Obviously, we're getting like a ton of new skills. That's obviously affecting like skill meta and whatnot. But the last few leagues haven't really had much in the way of skill balance, and we're finding like, player expectations there. And is that something that you're continuing to like not do, or any thoughts about that?
Again, a lot of it comes down to honestly time, but for this one, I really wanted to do something that wasn't just playing that almost cat and mouse game of like upskill A and then next league upskill B to be comparable, and then maybe it goes too far, so then you upskill A again, and if you don't do that, it's just nerf central, right? So where we do that for some extreme cases where we bring them down, I wanted to do something that really wasn't just, let's up cleave by 10% and something else by 10%. And again, noting I don't want to add mechanical complexity to a lot of skills, especially early, because it just makes them more convoluted and confusing. So this was a system that allowed us to not play that game, but yet add thousands and thousands or millions of possible permutations. And we're going to be less hesitant, given time resources, less hesitant to change the balance and change alternate gems or add new ones. So it's given us a system that allows us to do future balance a lot without compromising kind of that core game and that new player experience at all.
It does. It's also like, I mean, the quality changes are a pretty substantial balance change to existing skills. Like that's a big.
Oh no,
thing.
that is
a big thing.
for sure. And
Yeah,
and a number of skills have changed. Like what we've done is simplified some base skills because we have, and then what we've done is taken what they were doing. So an example of something we're trying to do. I don't actually know if we've done this because so maybe not. I know I probably shouldn't mention things like this, but for example, you get ethereal knives, and it's got all this talk about lingering blades going on. And yeah, most people who play the game in advance know what lingering blades are, but like a new player is not going to know that at all. So ideally we return EK to its former glory of what it was. And then we add an alternate gem that's really emphasizing that lingering blades mechanic and benefiting from that. And then we add another alternate, whatever, how many more alternate gems we want to. So it's allowing us to restore some of those, especially lower level gems, to their simplest forms. As what they should be, and then also give them a rebalance. I think often it's resulting in them being a little bit stronger early, which is going to change a little bit. But I like the resultant a lot better, where you're not getting overwhelmed with this kind of almost unnecessary information early, and then you get this alternate gem that's really emphasizing that mechanic more. And if you then go down that path, it can become even stronger than it ever was.
If a player is approaching the feedback of there need to be balance changes based on the fact that they feel there's some staleness in the metagame, if they feel they're playing the same kind of pool of builds for a number of leagues in a row, then the Transfigured Gem stuff will have fixed that, right? Like every build is now affected by there being multiple different versions of the skill available.
For sure.
There will be, it is going to look entirely different. And it's worth noting, Transfigured Gems came from me sitting down with Mark and saying, the players have an expectation for significant balance changes. The problem is we can't really do any. We've hit the point of like having to make the skills more complicated. What can we do? And Mark suggested Transfigured Gems, which, as Jonathan Blow would say, there was immediately tons of gold on the ground to pick up with that design thing, right? You know, it's so much cool stuff we can do, and absolutely is going to affect every build in the game. Great.
So conversely, talking about Ascendancy changes, last league Chieftain underwent a pretty big overhaul, but its rework seemed to have few fans in the end. It's at around 2% pick rate for most of the league in softcore, although it did gain some fans in hardcore, it seemed at least. What sort of goals do you have, like larger Ascendancy changes like that, and do you feel like the Chieftain hit the mark?
2%'s not bad, to be honest. It's still 10 times higher, 20 times higher than what it was. Or maybe even infinitely higher, because I think it was 0.0% for a while. Obviously rounding. But honestly, I would say it didn't quite hit the mark. But like, there's a fine line to tread when it comes to Ascendancy balance. Like 2% is probably less of a failure than 25%. Because if everyone's playing it, it's ridiculous. Or we go back to like Slayer Cyclone era where there's 51% or something. I'm going off PoE Ninja numbers, obviously, so high level players. But that's within a kind of like realm of acceptability. But yes, I would say like in an ideal world, it would have been a little bit better than what it was. So, but geez, it's hard to get that perfectly right, like for sure. But yeah, and obviously if something does get used in hardcore and sees more use there, that is something we like to see, and that's cool. Whether or not it's intentional or accidental, generally it's just the players discovering what's best. Like we don't plan around that kind of thing, but yeah.
Is it something you're going to continue working on then? Like not Chieftain specifically, but also just in general, trying to get something right with those pre-existing Ascendancies?
Every so often it's going to come up where we rebalance a given set of them, or maybe we do a wide sweeping numerical changes, or maybe we take two and completely redesign them, or take one and redesign it. But again, it's all at the expense of something else, and we just have to weigh those decisions. Like again, there's no time to do that when you have 100 to 200 between there of Transfigured Gems to make. It's the same people doing those things, so we just have to make those choices as to what we want to do. And maybe there is a better metagame thing we could be doing, but eventually we're going to circle back to them and we're going to rebalance them or remake them. Yeah.
And you did add 3 new Ascendancies in this
Yeah.
expansion.
Well, yeah. Technically, yes, there are 3 new Ascendancies. Yes.
Awesome stuff. Thank you very much for spending so much time with us for the Q&A today. We did run a bit over time. I appreciate that, and it was a pleasure to talk to you all. Thank you, Chris, Jonathan, and Mark.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much, Ziggy. It's appreciated.
Thanks.
Well,
Thank
great
you.
to talk to you.
And I
Righty.
hope to see some epically crazy builds on release day.
Yeah, awesome stuff.
Wildwood.
Thanks very much for watching, folks.